I use my ramps a lot because I do a lot of basic maintenance on my truck. So during a recent oil change on my F-150, I was kind of shocked to see that one of the ramps got bent pretty badly. This is because the front edge of the ramp dug into my concrete driveway and 7,000 pounds of rolling momentum had nowhere else to go. I was bummed because I've been using these ramps for the past 20 years and they seem sturdier than anything else that you can buy these days. I don't know about you, but I can't bring myself to crawl under a 7,000 pound truck supported by plastic ramps. There's enough bad reviews on these plastic ramps that I just couldn't pull the trigger. And then I saw someone using wooden ramps that they built themselves. Brilliant. The compressive strength of common dimensional lumber is several hundred pounds per square inch, so these would be more than strong enough to support the weight of my F-150. So I spent a few minutes laying out a design. I wanted these to be about 4 feet long in total length, and based on the footprint of my tires, I had to build them by 2x12 dimensional lumber so there was enough width to handle my stock tires. Ideally, you want the ramp to be wider than your tire, so keep this in mind if you've gone with wider all-terrain tires. With 4 levels to bring the height of the ramp to 6 inches, that meant that I needed about a 12-foot length of 2x12 per ramp. I also needed a small box of 2.5-inch wood screws with a Torx head, some Gorilla construction adhesive, some lag screws and washers, handles to move these monsters around, and casters so that I could roll them into place. As you'll see later, the finished ramps are about 50 pounds a piece, and they should last a lifetime of heavy use. While I'm on the material list, I did get a can of Flex Seal spray to help the underside grip the surface better, and I used an existing supply of Minwax polyurethane varnish to help protect these ramps from the weather. I've included a list of all parts, sources, and cutting dimensions in the More Info section below this video. All right, let's get building. Each 12-foot long 2x12 gets cut into 5 pieces, 48, 38, 28, and 18 inches long, which form the actual steps of the ramp. You'll have about a foot left from the 12-inch board after you make these cuts, which we'll use later. These are just straight crosscuts for now. For most people, it's too difficult to do these as a bevel cut right out of the gate, unless you have a radial arm saw or a sliding compound miter saw and a long table. I just used a circular saw with a number of supports to make the crosscuts. It can be dangerous cutting a piece of wood this wide without pinching the blade and getting kickback, so it pays to have a helper steady the piece. Once each piece was cut to length, I added the 45-degree bevel to one side of each step. I used a table saw and a miter sled to perform the cut and set the blade to 45 degrees. This is a little bit tricky with the larger pieces, but it can be done if you're slow and careful. Again, the better tools for this job would be a radial arm saw or a sliding compound miter saw. This could also be done with a circular saw with a blade set for 45 degrees, but to me, this is the least desirable and least safe option. Now it's time to stack the pieces together with adhesive and screws. I'm not going to give you a whole lot of direction here because how you do this doesn't really matter that much. I put 2 screws in about every 6 inches and I used a countersinking bit to bury the heads below the surface. Before I screw them together, I run a fat bead of construction adhesive. Now, I didn't think of it until the last board went on in this ramp, but use a couple of clamps to keep everything aligned perfectly while you screw these 2 boards together. I don't show it in this video, but I did wipe everything down before I glued and screwed these boards together. You want them to be mated together with no space between them, no foreign debris in there. The process is the same with the subsequent step, but it goes progressively faster since each additional board has less length and uses fewer screws. I'll speed up this part even more, as I'm sure you get the idea of how this is done by now. pay attention to the last segment that gets screwed in, because by then I figure out how to align the pieces with a couple of clamps. You should use this process with all of the pieces if you can. Okay, here's the completed main ramp, which we'll set aside and let the construction adhesive dry overnight. Now, I don't really like the idea of all those open holes, which will just be a magnet for water and insects. So I'm going to use my plug cutting bit on my drill press to cut some plugs, which will glue into the holes. You can just use a scrap piece of 2x lumber and cut a bunch of plugs with this bit. We'll pop them out of the piece of scrap and pound them in. Just a little bit of glue on the bottom side and we'll knock them into the hole. All right, calling Phil Swift, Mr. Flex Seal, do your thing. These are the bottom of the ramps, and I'm going to hit them with a couple of passes of rubberized Flex Seal. This should prevent the ramp from sliding as the truck rolls up the ramp. After the glue dries, I'll use my pole saw to trim the heads flush. By the way, this might be the most dangerous tool in my shop. Watch out for your fingers on your other hand. Don't ask me how I know. So we're going to cut off all the exposed plugs and sand them flush before we hit it with polyurethane. Now we're going to add those extra pieces of wood from the original 12-foot length of lumber for the end pieces. You can also see that I've added the polyurethane to the ramp wood to help seal it against Mother Nature in case I leave them outside by accident. Some guys just screw 2-inch blocks to the top to help prevent the tire from rolling off the ramp, but I like the idea of covering the end grain of the ramp with an end piece. I'm going to space the bottom of this end piece up about 1/8 of an inch off the ground by using this ruler as a spacer, and then mark where this hits the top of the ramp, and then give it a 2-inch rise above the top step of the ramp to help prevent the tire from rolling over it. We'll then cut these final pieces to length. Here I am marking where the lag screws will go into the end plate, and I'll countersink the washer and head by using a Forstner bit, which is bigger than the washer. Just like before, we'll use construction adhesive and snug it up with the lag screws. I'm using lag screws instead of just wood screws since I think that there might be some stress from the tire hitting the top of that lip and trying to push this end piece right off the end of the ramp. Now we put on the final hardware and we're done. I don't think it matters where the handles are located, so I'll just put some on the side. I've also got some swiveling steel casters so I can let the ground take the weight of these monsters while I drag them into place. Again, nothing is necessarily exact for this step, just use common sense. As I mentioned before, these ramps weigh about 50 pounds apiece. So here are the completed ramps, and here's an example of them being wheeled into place. And here's me backing onto them for the first time. And a side shot of one of the tires shows that the top 18-inch step of this ramp is just the perfect size to center the tire on. Hey everybody, thanks for watching the video. Look, I know I'm not the first guy to ever figure out how to build a set of ramps out of wood, nor will I be the last. I thought there'd be some value in showing you exactly how I did it so you would have confidence to be able to do your own. So please take my directions as just suggestions and see what you can do to improve on what I've done already. Now, before you go, one thing I do want to mention is that before you use a wooden ramp like this, make sure that you sweep or brush off the surface that you're going to be using the ramps on, because any kind of foreign debris, any pebbles, any sticks, any little surface debris that's on there will get embedded into the bottom of the ramps, because a 7,000-pound truck pushing down on those ramps, anything that's on there, any kind of nuts or seeds or pebbles or anything will get embedded into the bottom of the ramp. So if you want these things to last for a long time, sweep off the bottom of your driveway and you're going to be good to go. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.